Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Friday. Thank you so much for sharing your next hour with us to focus on your personal and professional development. My name is Emma Maynard, and I am the Assistant Director of Career and Network Programming here in the Office of Alumni Relations in the beautiful Harrisonburg, Virginia, especially beautiful today with our full sunshine and close to 80-degree weather. Yes, it is February, hard to believe. Today's webinar is brought to you by the JMU Alumni Association. We are excited to bring you this alumni webinar program with the goal of providing tailored career-related resources that help you conveniently cultivate your professional self. Before I introduce today's speaker, I just want to cover some brief housekeeping notes. If you are participating live, you'll notice that your microphones are muted for the presentation. There are two chat options available to you that you'll have access to at the top right-hand corner of your screen. During the presentation, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature and send those questions privately to me, the host, and I'll be sure to share those at the end with our presenter. You can also use the chat option. Make sure that you open that up because our presenter, Kelly, will be asking you guys to participate in some chatting, and you'll be able to enter in your responses and select all participants before sending. We'd also love to see you live tweet during the presentation. So if you could use hashtag JMU as well as hashtag JMUAAwebinar to share any cool takeaways or quotes from today's webinar, and you could win some pretty amazing JMU swag for your office or home. The webinar will also be recorded and accessible on our website under the Career and Networking section, and I'll also be sure to send that out to you via email within the next week. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Kelly. Kelly is a leadership coach and founder of Open Circle Coaching. She has provided over 1,000 hours of leadership coaching and dozens of professional development programs over her 25 years of experience in the field. She has worked with individuals and teams in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Kelly is a graduate of Georgetown University's Leadership Coaching Program and is a certified coach of the International Coach Federation. Next year, she will complete her master's degree in organizational development at Case Western Reserve University. And she earned her bachelor's degree, of course, from the wonderful JMU in 1992. Kelly lives over the mountain from Harrisonburg near Charlottesville, Virginia, where she believes she can still hear the roar of the JMU football crowd on some days. She is passionate about building teams and supporting leaders to create the best organization possible for their sector, their colleagues, and themselves. Now with that, I'd like to hand it off to Kelly as she shares with us how to be a leader with any position, title, or salary.
Great. Thank you, Emma, and hello, Dukes. I am really excited to be doing this webinar with you today, and here is why I'm excited. There is a myth that persists that only bosses, supervisors, and C-level people are leaders, and I completely disagree with that perception. My philosophy on what makes a leader is actually this. My definition of a leader is anyone who notices a change that needs to be made and then takes that first step. Thus, anyone can and should be a leader. In this sense, I believe that we all can and often must be leaders. Leadership is not something reserved for only the senior-most people. It is not just for the person with the highest degree or even with the most experience. It instead is the person who takes that first step towards change. They are the leader in that moment, with that group, and for that reason. So this is a shift in mindset. And the first step in becoming a leader is adopting a shift in mindset. I'd like to share another shift in mindset with you. And I will do this by telling you about a mistake that I made. And I made it for about 15 years. So here's what my mistake was. That mistake I made was for 15 years, I considered myself as a secondary player in the companies where I worked. I worked at a law firm and then a management consulting firm, McKinsey & Company. And at those firms, even though I managed the professional development for hundreds of consultants and lawyers, I never believed that I was a primary player in the organization. I thought the consultants and attorneys were the primary players, naturally. But fortunately, one day I realized that I was simply a different kind of primary player. I was a leader for the development of these people, and their success was my success and our company's success. And that's when my mindset shifted, right? That's when I now saw myself as a primary player. So with this newfound perspective, I was so excited and reawakened that I immediately decided to leave. And I started my own leadership coaching company. Now, I suspect that many of you are not making this same mistake. But I would suggest that at a minimum, we all can still learn more and challenge ourselves more to think bigger, to act bigger. And when we do that, that is when we show leadership, simply by thinking and acting bigger. So what I would invite you to do right now is to ask yourself what you are not yet doing. Think of what you are not doing at work right now because you are holding back. Where do you feel you could step up but don't for various reasons? Please grab a piece of paper and get ready to jot down just a few words. And I strongly urge you to grab that piece of paper now. I guarantee you will get more from the rest of this hour if you do, because we're going to simulate a coaching conversation here, and you will get more from it if you write down what your response is, since we obviously can't have a one-on-one conversation. All right, so if you have that piece of paper, here we go. I would like you to jot down these sentences and then complete them. Jot down the sentences, I don't know how to, I don't take the lead in, I'm not good at. Please take a moment to jot those down and complete the sentences thinking about your work persona. What happens at work? And I'll give you about 15 or 20 seconds to write down those answers. All right. So if you've completed those sentences, how many people are feeling a bit frustrated or down right now? I suspect quite a few. If you could go to the chat window in the bottom right of your screen and select all participants and send just a one-word answer of what describes your mood right now. Great. All right. Now, what I'd like you to do is add yet to the ends of each of those sentences. So how many people just got a little bump in their mood just from adding yet to the end of their sentences? How would you describe your mood now? Again, if you want to go to the bottom of your screen to the chat window and just send out a one-word answer. And again, please use the all attendees. Yeah, so hopeful coming in. Right. Positive. Yes. So what you just did was you completed a short exercise in the growth mindset. And how does this work? It works like this. The growth mindset says that we can always learn. In fact, we are always becoming something else. We are always adding new skills so long as we see our current failures simply as successes that haven't happened yet. So how do you use this? And what does this have to do with leadership? Well, there's a couple ways. One way you can use it is the next time a colleague drops into your office talking about all the opportunities she doesn't have, all the skills she doesn't have, ask her to add yet to the end of those sentences. And watch how her mood bumps up, even just a little. Notice how that changes her attitude towards her setbacks, seeing them no longer as permanent obstacles. They are simply obstacles she hasn't overcome yet. And this is something that leaders do. You can also do what you just did a moment ago and add yet to your own sentences as you hear yourself speaking throughout your workday. And when organizations are thinking of succession pipelines, excuse me, and who to promote, they want to hear who has potential. They want to see who feels hopeful and confident about their own development. And so if they hear you saying, and even more importantly, you hear yourself saying that your current weak areas are simply strengths you haven't developed yet, then they and you will literally hear that potential in yourself. Now, any change in our environment has to begin with a change in our mindset. And adding yet is one simple step to changing that mindset. But again, what does this have to do with leadership? I'll give you two reasons. Number one, you will be showing people leadership when you help your colleague see her setbacks as temporary. You are showing her a different mindset that will take her down a different path to her development. And when you think about the leaders that you have worked with in the past that you've respected, I suspect this is what they have done with you. They have seen your potential. They have seen your setbacks as only temporary. And you can do this with your colleagues and peers no matter what your title or role is. Here's the second way that this pertains directly to leadership. All successful leaders adopt this mindset about themselves. The best leaders are those people who are always learning, who are not frustrated by their setbacks, but who try to do more, knowing that they have the potential for more growth. And that makes all the difference, because then those setbacks and those failures and those things that they get wrong, they do not weigh as heavily on their shoulders. They see them as temporary. They see them, in fact, as a stepping stone towards what they are going to improve and learn more about. And whenever you learn and whenever you have that kind of growth, your brain looks like this. This is a picture of what a brain looks like when it's learning. It's an image from an fMRI that was taken while a subject was learning a new lesson in French, in this case, right? And they were able to measure, to actually see the new neural pathways being formed, those bright horizontal lines that you see going across the screen. It made a real and tangible difference in the physical makeup of the person's brain when they learned something new. So every time you have a setback like this, if you approach it as something that you have now learned to do, not only will your mindset shift, but your brain will actually change in its physical structure as well. And that is real change. All right. So that was my introduction to what it means to be a leader. Here's the agenda that we're going to talk about today. So we've already talked about the growth mindset. And then in a minute, we're going to shift into the 4 tools that I want to share with you around how to think strategically, how to make requests more effectively, how to listen with curiosity, and how to see the big picture. I've picked these tools because they can help solve the 4 different problems I hear most frequently when I'm coaching leaders. And I hope that as you look at this list, it includes skills that you'd like to develop further as well. So let's begin with the first tool, around thinking strategically. This tool helps with thinking strategically because it helps you address a large, difficult problem that could have many solutions. For example, imagine you are sitting in a meeting with your team and you're discussing, for example, how to increase sales over the next year, right? People are throwing around ideas about increasing hiring or maybe changing markets or maybe merging, and there's just no solution in sight. The conversation is starting to spin. Well, how do you start answering such a huge question? I would suggest try using this framework. This framework is called What's Important, What's Missing, and What's Next. What you can do with this framework is take your group through these 3 questions to help them clarify what they need to do and how to do it. So let's begin with the first one, right? Asking them, what is really important here? Is it increasing sales, or is it actually increasing revenue? Or is it improving client relationships and experiences, right? But whatever it is, when a conversation has spun out of control, a leader is someone who notices that and steps in and asks the question that brings the conversation back into focus, right? You are leading the conversation by asking people to get crystal clear on what is truly most important right now. Once they've established that, then ask what the group needs to fulfill this goal. Ask what is missing. What do we not yet have? What needs to be developed? Asking this question moves them forward. It gives them a future goal to move towards and make sure that they are taking a new approach to whatever the problem is. Then finally, push the group to further action by asking, what are the next steps? What's next? If you've identified that better client experience is what is most important, and say what is missing is better understanding clients' needs, then ask, what is the very first step you need to take to begin to understand those needs? And again, this is what leadership is. It's leadership because you are leading the conversation. You are asking the smart questions that drive people towards solution and action. This is what leaders do. They can rise above the fray of a conversation and ask the questions that drive the conversation forward. They don't necessarily give the answers. Instead, they help discover what doesn't yet exist. Instead, they corral a group of people together on a mission to find the answers. And they can do this simply by asking questions. So we'll talk in a few minutes about specific ways to ask these questions. But the point here is that by asking questions, you not only direct the group in a positive, solutions-based direction, but you also give them something else of huge value. And that is confidence. If you can pull a group out of a conversation that is spiraling downward, and they instead start to identify what's important and what's missing and what they actually need to do next, then you give them the confidence that they can answer those questions. You are showing that you trust that they have the answers. And when another person senses that you believe they have the answer, then their confidence increases. And as their confidence increases, endorphins are released in the bloodstream and neurons begin to fire in the prefrontal cortex of the brain where creativity resides. And suddenly you've equipped them to tackle this tough issue. All of these very real and biological effects happen. And they just needed a few key questions and space to reflect on them. And all the while, You are in a growth mindset about their ability to learn these answers. You believe the team does know the answers. They just haven't articulated them yet because they've been too busy spinning in circles in that group discussion. So lead them out of it with a few questions to focus their attention. Now, if you're not sure that this is going to work or it feels a little too much like touchy-feely self-help stuff, here's a quick reality check. Let me ask you this question, and again, you can just jot down the answers on that piece of paper next to you. Let me ask you, who was your favorite teacher back in school? Back at JMU, who was your favorite instructor? Jot down their name. Okay. Now, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 as the highest, write down how much this teacher's respect for your intellect influenced your performance. Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 as the highest, write down how much this teacher's respect for your intellect influenced your performance. All right. Again, if you would like to go to the chat window and just send in your number that you wrote down, please do so. And again, select all participants. Actually, Emma's now saying use all panelists. Oh, all attendees. Use all attendees to send in your number. 4, 5, yes. Yes, I suspect many of you wrote down 4 or 5. And that was in a classroom with many others, not even in a smaller group or one-on-one situation like you will have with your colleagues. Respect a person's intellect and abilities, and they will give more loyalty to you. It's another element that leaders are able to gather. Okay, now let's try this out right here. As I said, with all of these tools today, I'll ask you to try them out. And I ask you to do this so that you can notice what works or doesn't work for you. Some of these tools will fit perfectly, some will not. And if you have the opportunity just to jot down a few ideas now, you'll get a sense of whether they do. So here are the instructions for what I'd ask you to do next. Pick a topic, right? Something that is important at work right now that has been difficult to solve, something that your team has been trying to figure out, right? And write down what's important about it. What's the most important element or outcome or piece of it? And then jot down what's missing, what's not present, what has been absent from this that has been making it so difficult. And then finally jot down what's next. What is that first small step you need to take now that you've identified what's missing that you can do? What is actionable right now? And again, I'll give you about 30 seconds to consider this, and then we'll move forward. All right. So I won't ask you to send in these answers, but do consider these next few questions of what was different about your approach to this issue when you were answering these questions? What do you feel is possible now that you've considered the issue from this angle? What are some ways that you might use this tool? What problem at work really needs this approach applied to it to see if it can be solved or at least improved? Think about what's coming up on your calendar. When could you use this tool and with whom? Make a note about this because again, this is a leadership trait, right? Thinking back to that first definition that I have of what a leader is, right? It's the person who notices a change needs to happen and takes the first small step to address it. If you take this first small step to address whatever topic you wrote about here, that is being a leader. Okay, let's move to the next one. This next tool is about how to lead a group conversation through a difficult challenge. And when you are, that one was about through a group conversation. This next one's about when you're talking one-on-one with someone and you have to make a request of them. How do you show leadership in those situations when you are with someone and you have to make a request? Here's what I would offer. This is called the Complete Communication Wheel. And it's a tool for tricky or sensitive conversations because it provides you with a map so that you can move clearly and swiftly through all the different parts of a request conversation so that you don't get bogged down in any one spot. It's a way to structure a conversation so that you clearly state the issue, describe your views, and specifically request what you need to do. You can use it when you're leading any kind of difficult conversation with someone, or if someone comes to you for advice on how to handle a tricky conversation, you can show them this model. All right, here's how it works. We're going to start in the top right section where it says data, and that's how you open up a conversation. You begin with data, stating what are the facts of the issue. And to make sure it's truly data that you are stating and not opinions, be vigilant that you are only giving actual facts. You can, I sometimes tell my clients, you can pretend you're an expert witness in a trial and that you've been called to the stand and sworn to tell only the truth. If you're in a situation like that, you give only data that you are certain of. Everything else that you want to say to the person has to wait until we get to judgments. The other benefit of starting with data is that there is no room for disagreement, right? Facts are facts. So you can begin with something you both agree on. So you state the facts of the situation. You can then move to feelings and state what your emotions are. It's important to do this because we're all humans and we have some sort of emotional reaction to most issues that need a conversation about them. But be sure to do this in an emotionally neutral way. State your opinions. Don't express them, right? There's a difference. Then shift to your judgments and be clear that this is your interpretation of the event. It's not facts. You can literally say, this is my interpretation of what happened, and then move straight on to wants. Because dwelling in judgments too long is where conversations go off the rails. You guys can all probably think of times where you get stuck in a conversation that has just been full of one judgment or misinterpretation after another, and it is so hard to dig out of those conversations. So after you state what your interpretation is, then quickly move to wants. State what you want, and then show your flexibility by following that up with offering what you are willing to do to make that happen. And thus, you've ended the conversation on a positive note of helpfulness. So let me give you an example, and I'll take you around the wheel, okay? So say I need to talk to a colleague about their tardiness to this weekly team meeting that I run. However, this colleague is actually a peer, so it's going to be a little tricky to talk to them about this. Here's what I could say, starting at the top with data. I could say, I've noticed that you've been 10 minutes late to our last 3 team meetings. Okay, I'm starting with hard factual data. Then I move on to emotions and say, this makes me feel rotten because I believe you don't think these meetings are important. Here I've mentioned both my feelings and my interpretation of her actions. Then I could say, I would like everyone to be present right at 11 o'clock so we can begin on time. Here I'm clearly stating what I want. And then I end with, I'm willing to close our meeting 5 minutes early if we start on time. And now I've stated what I am willing to do. If you take a person through the wheel like this, you've led the conversation by starting with facts And if they are not ready to agree to your request, then you can talk about it a little further. In fact, you can take them around the wheel. You can ask them questions for each part of this. You can ask them, well, what do you see as the facts here? How do you feel about it? What are your judgments or interpretations about this situation? What do you really want here? And then what are you willing to do? Those are the questions that you can ask them. And that gives you so much information back about what they see as the facts of the situation, how they feel about it, how they're interpreting it, what they really want, and what their willingness is to do to solve it. Again, this is you taking leadership in a conversation. You are taking control of it, but control in an open and flexible way. Control in the sense that you are not going to let it go off the rails, but you are being open and flexible by stating your interpretations when they are such and showing willingness to help solve the problem. All right, so that is how you can use the wheel. Now, I promised earlier that we would talk a little bit about how to form questions. So let me give you a few tips on this that you can use both with this wheel and on that what's important missing next framework. And these are my tips. The best questions start with what or how. Using these two words to begin your questions ensures you ask an open-ended question. And what makes an open-ended question better? It's better because it elicits a richer response. Consider this basic question you might ask a colleague. Hey, are you ready for Tuesday's presentation? If you ask that, you'd likely get a 1 or 2 word answer. That's not much information. That doesn't tell you too much about how they're feeling about Tuesday. But instead, if you asked, hey, how ready do you feel for Tuesday's presentation? Think of what a much richer answer you'd get. He might tell you far more information about how he's feeling, about the section he feels confident about or the part where he's less certain. He might even ask for your input. And that's so much richer than a response of, yeah, fine, right? So starting with what or how provides some openness. It allows for more speaking from the other person. And it shows your curiosity and caring, right? It helps you get to their thinking, and people like to know that you care about what they're thinking. Now, another open-ended question can begin with why, but why is very difficult to use effectively, and that's why I put it in red with a slash through it, right? Because asking why puts people on the defensive. It makes them give long reasons why they did something. Imagine the same example again, only this time you ask your colleague, why do you think you're ready? Or why are you doing that? Can you imagine how defensive he would be? How likely it is he would either give a really long reason about why he thinks he's ready, or he would clamp up and not answer you at all. Either way, you're stuck, and you're trying to smooth out the relationship again. Now, a couple of comments about yes-no questions. I put that as a caution, right? Use them with caution. They can be asked, but very sparingly. Because again, as I gave in the first example, asking a yes-no question, it gives you very little info. And sometimes that's what you want, right? Sometimes you don't always want the long, drawn-out explanation of what is going on with the person. So that's when it's fine to use yes-no questions. But make sure that when you do ask them, it does not include an assumption that you are making about the person. So a yes-no question, say about that readiness, right? Are you ready for Tuesday's presentation? If I ask that with a certain tone in my voice, the other person may hear an assumption in there that I'm making that he isn't ready. All right, so let's try these out. So think of a tricky upcoming conversation, right? Somebody, again, at work that you know you have to address them about this issue because this issue has been hanging around for a while. and it really has got to be at least addressed and ideally resolved. Go around the wheel and write what you would say for each part of it, the data, the feelings, etc. I'll flick back to the screen in just a minute. And then notice which parts are difficult and consider why. So I'll flick back to it now. Think about that situation and write down what you would say at each part in the wheel. And again, I'll give you about, let's say about 20 seconds to do that. Go ahead. All right. You probably haven't had time to write down all of your answers yet, but perhaps you got started on it. What did you notice were the difficult parts? Where in the circle was it hard to think of what you would write? Feel free to go down to your chat window and again, just type in the one-word answer of which part of this wheel was hard to write about just now. Yeah, feelings are hard to write about, aren't they? You know, it's hard because feelings are intangible, and so to put words against them is difficult. You know, what I would say here is luckily the feelings part should be fairly brief. And you can state them as feelings, right? I feel this way, or my emotional reaction to that is you know, sadness, right? Or whatever it is. And then quickly move out of that, because it doesn't help the other person that much to hear what your feelings are. It helps some, and that's why it's included in the wheel, so they get a sense of how important this is to you. But it doesn't get to the last two parts of the wheel, which are the most important, right? The wants and the willingness. Now, imagine you needed to go around the wheel again. How would you shape your questions? I'll flip. What would you write if you were taking the person around the wheel? Consider that, and if you want to assign yourself a little bit of homework, you can do so to complete those sections of the wheel for this conversation that you know you need to have. So if that's how we lead a conversation by talking, can we still lead a conversation when we're just listening? I say yes. And here is a rule to help you do that. And it is this. It's called the 80-20 rule of silence. Right? And I made up this name. This is something that can be used when someone comes to you with a problem, but you know that it is something they have the ability to solve themselves. And this is what the rule says. It says 80% of the time, others are speaking, and you can be silent. And 20% of the time, you are speaking. And what this is, it's a way to remember how much to just listen when someone is working through a problem. So often we want to jump in and try to provide the solution. Of course we do. It's the natural human empathetic thing to do. But sometimes that doesn't help them, right? It can erode their confidence, or it can take you down a different path than where they want to go. Sometimes the very best thing to do is listening. And when you listen to someone, that's the fastest way to build trust with them. But it's not just any kind of listening. It's a special kind of listening without judgment. It's listening with only the curiosity to learn. Consider a time when a boss or a supervisor you've had fully and truly listened to you. Jot down their name, just on your piece of paper. Jot down their name. How did it make you feel? How positive was the outcome of those conversations? And if you haven't had such a boss, one, I'm sorry. Two, think of one that did very little listening. How did that make you feel? Right? This is how important it is for leaders to listen. By listening, you are showing the other person that you value them enough to focus on them for just a few minutes. Listening causes you to be fully engaged. You aren't thinking about what you're going to say next. You are simply and only engaged in what the other person is saying. And that's what successful leaders do. It's the ability to make them feel they are the only other person in the room. But we must truly listen. We can't fake listening because of those hundreds of microfacial expressions that flit across our faces in a single conversation. You know, it only takes a person anywhere between 17 and 32 milliseconds at most to read your face. That's how much is going on our face if we are that the other person is seeing. So focus on focusing on the other person. And when you do speak, make it count. Ask a question that gets to what you see as the core of the issue. Use one of those what or how questions that elicit such a richer, more detailed response. Here's another way of thinking about listening, and maybe you guys have seen this before. There are 3 types of listening. There's level 1, which is subjective. And at this level, it's important you're listening for things that are important and necessary only if you've never experienced or heard of this situation before. For example, if my neighbor starts talking about where they went over the holidays, then I might relate it to when I went to that place as well, right? I'm listening just at the subjective level. At the level 2, this is where I start to listen a little more deeply. It's important and necessary to listen at the level 2 level if you are problem solving or trying to build some new skills or putting out something urgent. For example, if I've started a new job and I'm trying to learn the payroll system, then I'll use level 2 listening. I'm focused on what the other person is saying, and I'm trying to learn something new. And then there's level 3 listening, right? This is at the intuitive level, and this is when I use this when relationship building is the key goal, or if I'm mentoring, or if I'm talking with a client, or if I am in a leadership role. I will use level 3 if I'm trying to solve some kind of problem, or if I'm the leader in a group and I want to be fully listening to everything the person is saying and not saying. At level 3, we are more attuned to the other person's needs and thus better able to help them find a solution that works. Now, this framework sits on an inverted pyramid like this for a reason. It indicates how we gain the least information from level 1 listening and the most information from level 3. So to be a leader in any situation, listen fully at level 3 to what is being said. Sometimes we spend the time that the other person is talking about, crafting our response. Forget that strategy. That doesn't work. What matters most to people is feeling heard, right? People don't remember what you say. They remember how they felt. So if people notice how attentive you are, how focused and observant, they will think of you as more of a leader. All right. So no need to write out the answers to these questions now, but you might make a few notes about who at work do you not understand? And when was the last time you listened to them? And was it at level 3 listening? How curious were you about their behaviors, right, and their motivations, their decisions? A leader will listen to others and not take any feedback personally. They'll simply listen and act on what they can do and believe to be right. Now, what if it's not just one person that you are trying to understand, but a whole group? What if you're faced with a multifaceted problem that is triggering you, when it's making you respond emotionally instead of intellectually? Try this final tool. It's called Getting on the Balcony, and it's a very simple tool. It was put forward by this guy, Ronald Heifetz. He first wrote about it in 1994, and the concept is you simply consciously remove yourself from the action going on down on the stage, right? The drama that is happening at work. and view it from up on the balcony so that you don't get swept up in the field of play, but you're able instead to view it all from a distance. And when an issue is viewed from a distance, then you can be more calm and centered, right? I mean, on some level, we all know this, right, that it makes sense to remove ourselves, but what do we really gain from doing it? What we gain is this, and this is probably the most important point I'll make today. What we gain by putting ourselves up on the balcony is that we are now playing the long game. The long game is when we take a longer perspective on what is going on around us. We aren't swept up in the immediate issues and dramas that are happening. We are thinking long term. And players that can see a farther horizon are the leaders. They are the ones who can be more objective and see options more clearly. So, again, homework that you can assign yourself tonight is to consider a difficult situation that you're involved in right now. And if you were to remove yourself from the action, what would you see? What does that issue look like from up on the balcony? What new options appear to you? Once we do this, then that perspective shifts and our mindset shifts as well, which is how we started off talking today. A shift in mindset is what's behind each of these tools. And this is the overview of all of those tools we talked about today. Adding yet for our growth mindset, right? And how it helps us reframe our abilities. We talked about what's important, missing, and next as a framework for leading a group through a difficult decision. Then I shared the complete communication wheel with you as a way to lead a conversation in which you're making a request of someone, and then to use it again on them to understand their point of view. We then shifted to the other side of communication. Instead of talking, we shifted over to listening. And I shared the 80-20 rule as a reminder of how staying silent can empower the other person and build their loyalty to you. And then there were the 3 levels of listening to ensure we hear all that is happening in any given conversation. And finally, we talked about getting on the balcony as a way to play the long game and view a problem objectively. As you think over these tools, I'd ask you to do one last thing, and that is think about what was most important from what I shared today. What do you want to make sure lives on from what you heard? Make a commitment to doing it. Then write out what that first step would be to begin the process of fulfilling that commitment. And then finally, add the date by which you'll complete that small step. Leaders make commitments that are clear and meaningful, and you can do that regardless of your title, your salary, or your position. This is yet another way for you to show that leadership. So, in closing, here's my offer to you. If you would like to learn more tools, I send out a short note each month describing a new behavior or mindset that you can introduce to your workplace. If you'd like to receive that note, please send an email to this address, kelly@opencirclecoaching.com, and just write blog in the subject line. If you're potentially interested in one-on-one leadership coaching, then drop me a note and we'll schedule a time to talk about the services and involved in a coaching relationship. And if we decide to move forward, then you'll receive a 20% discount on that. And if you're potentially interested in offering leadership development workshops to your team, again, drop me a note and we'll schedule a time to talk. And if we move forward on that, then you'd get a 10% discount on services. If you have questions about how any of these tools might work in your particular culture, please let me know. We have time to take some questions now or later. And remember, we are all leaders and must be leaders in some way every day, especially Dukes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. What a fantastic presentation. What I really appreciate, and I'm sure your fellow listeners appreciate, are all the practical exercises that we can use to explore our leadership potential. And really, that, there is a theme of the relationship building and these soft skills that we can utilize, especially through communication, and how we can all have, we all have conversations every day, and how using some of the tools that you showed us can make those communication outlets more powerful and more strategic. So we do have a few questions that have come in. The first question was actually about that communication wheel, and we had a question about if there are any resources or maybe books that you know of that talk about that communication wheel in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so I got that actually from my program at Georgetown, from a professor there. So I don't know what book it came from. It might have been his own research, but I am happy to share the PDF of it. So if any of you would like a copy of the wheel, and I think there's another one-page description that goes along with it, just drop me an email and I'd be happy to send it to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kelly. Another question that came in was regarding the regarding the questions through communication style. You mentioned, trying to avoid the why questions. So our one participant asked, how do you, I guess, stop someone who maybe is prone to using that why start and steer them or coach them to engage in more effective questions and communication?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question about a question. If it is a peer or someone that you feel comfortable with, you can actually use the wheel on them. You can say, hey, I've noticed that you use why questions a lot. You might not want to, say how many times, but start with data, right? That makes me feel a little defensive, like you're questioning my ability, right? There's the feelings and the judgments. What do you think about using, trying out starting questions with what or how? And I'd be willing to, give you a little reminder about that the next time we're in a group team meeting, because I think it would really help our team dynamics, right? You can take them around the wheel to talk about a tricky situation like that. If it's a supervisor or someone that you don't feel comfortable having that candid of a conversation with, then you can just answer the question differently. Just like journalists do, right? Or people responding to the media, you don't have to answer the question that was asked necessarily. If someone says, why is your report late? You can answer it, well, what happened was that, two other projects came in and the deadline got moved up, right? You can just respond in a way as if they had asked you, what happened with the report last night? If you take them, if you notice and deliberately avoid a defensive tone, then that can de-escalate the tension, and then maybe at a later date you can approach them about changing their question format.
So it's all about open communication combined with strategic use of the tools that you were showing.
Yeah.
Another question we had, and I know you talked about a lot of key characteristics that lead to effective leadership in any position, title, or salary. But do you have one piece of advice that you would give somebody entering a more traditional leadership role? So maybe they are supervising for the very first time, to be an impactful, quote-unquote, leader of those that will then be working for them on a new team?
Yeah. If I was only to give one piece of advice, it would probably be to develop your team, right? Develop the people around you. Focus on them. Because if your team is successful, then you will be seen as successful, right? You will show that you have that humility of a strong leader, but also the fierce resolve of developing the people around you. And then you're unstoppable, right? If you've got a great team.
That's so true. Kind of on the flip side of that, another question was, What do you think is probably the biggest mistake somebody could make in trying to be an effective leader? What's a mistake that would bring you further away from living that role?
Yeah. Well, other than saying the opposite
Hopefully
of what I
avoid
just
it.
said. Right, right, right. You know, the mistake I most often see is people underestimating their own potential. You know, they feel like some things they can't do, or I'm not born that way, or I just don't have that natural skill. When in fact it's just something that they haven't developed yet,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's why I led off with the growth mindset today, because I really feel that that is where at least the leaders that I work with most often sell themselves short. And
Mm-hmm.
our brains physically are ever growing. They have something called neuroplasticity, which means that they constantly change. So there is no point in your life or my life or anyone's life when our brains stop growing. It's not like all the other muscles and bones in our body. There is literally limitless potential for your brain to develop.
I completely agree. I'm familiar with the growth mindset as well, and it is your your perspective, especially on yourself, is so powerful. And many of the times, the limits that you see in front of you are unfortunately set by you. So it's how can you see beyond that and see your full potential there? I think we have time for one final question. And this one's kind of just about mentorship and your role now as a leadership coach. And if you had a mentor that you worked with to help you develop professionally, and or have you ever mentored, and how did that relationship get started? A lot of people talk about mentorship and how important it is, but it's hard to figure out how to actually get that going. If you have any experience there.
I do have experience. I have had mentors, and I have them now, fortunately. I think to get it started, it is simply by asking people. I guess the very first step is stepping back and noticing, who is it that you really respect? Who is it that feels confident in their own skin? And it's not necessarily someone who has a style similar to your own, but finding instead someone who feels confident and comfortable in their own skin makes for a great mentor, because then when you go to them and ask them to be a mentor and you start having mentoring conversations with them, then you can be completely honest. Because ideally, your mentor is someone that you can be pretty vulnerable with, that you can say, hey, I did this client presentation on Thursday and it sucked, right? It was bad. It was bad for reasons A, B, and C, and I really want to figure out how to do it a different way next time. So if you can be, that level of candor with someone, then I think that's what makes a great mentoring relationship. And if someone is confident in themselves, they won't cut you down or make you feel terrible for confessing something like that.
Absolutely. Well, I think to finish things off, I want to echo a comment here from one of our participants, John, who noted that this was an awesome presentation, and he has 25 plus years as a leader, and he always tells people to learn something new every day, and he thought that the webinar that you just delivered was an excellent opportunity, and he did learn some new things. So on behalf of the JMU Alumni Association, I want to thank you, Kelly, for your time and presentation today. I also want to thank all of our participants that attended today's webinar and for sharing your hour with us to focus on your own professional development. I do ask that you please take just a moment to complete the survey you'll receive when you exit the webinar, as your feedback helps us to continue to provide tailored programming like this for you all. And we do hope that you'll join us for our next alumni webinar, and that will be on March 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, featuring alumna Christine Hammond and her presentation, How to Find Freedom from Exhaustion. So exhaustion doesn't just stem from physical issues. It has roots in your thoughts, feelings, unresolved trauma, and difficult people. So Christine will talk us through navigating that process. So again, I want to thank Kelly and our participants, and I hope that you all have a wonderful Friday afternoon, and go Dukes.